You're watching W.Media, and I'm Deborah Gray, editor-in-chief. Joining me today for a very special chat is our dear guest, Jason Lowe, head of APAC at Iceotope. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you for having me here.
Now, both you and I are very passionate about climate change, and we've been talking about its impact on the global cloud and data center industry. I want to focus today on Southeast Asia, where we've been noticing a lot of extreme weather events, whether it is heat waves or droughts. And as someone who is working in the cooling industry, what do you think the impact of liquid cooling can be in sort of alleviating the dependence on water?
So when it comes to cooling the data centers, very often for traditional data centers, we pump a lot of cold air through the data centers in order to cool all the IT equipments down. But this at the same time generate a lot of heat that has to be retransformed back into cool air and goes back to the data centers. And water has been one of the media that the industry used to cool it down, especially things like evaporative cooling. And that requires a lot of water to do that. Now, liquid cooling technology basically bring cooling closer to where the source of all the heat is coming from. That means where the IT equipments are. So by being able to more effectively cool the heat generated by all these IT equipment, it means that the amount of heat we need to cool could be less intensive. For instance, we could be using dry coolers instead of evaporative cooling if we have an efficient cooling method that is being done at the server stack itself.
Interesting, Jason, because I was also thinking about Malaysia and particularly Johor. Johor has come up in the last few years in a big way. It's a data center hub, it's an AI driven data center hub, and Johor is also suffering from water shortages. What role do you think liquid cooling can play in helping this data center market thrive?
So especially when it comes to things like AI, it means it requires very high computing needs. And that also means that the heat generated from all these servers are much higher. So it definitely poses a challenge to using traditional air cooling. Of course, we can continue to pump colder and colder air into the data centers to cool it down. And that again goes back to the fact that it's going to require more water in order to cool down this air that's moving around from the data center to out of it, and then to be able to generate it back to the data centers. Now, by using liquid cooling, the main aim is to be able to effectively remove heat from the server itself, because using liquid, it is a better form of media to remove heat compared to air. So when we can effectively remove the heat from the server components, from the IT stacks, it means that the rest of the data design can be more effective. Again, it could mean that we could use air, ambient temperature to cool it down, such as dry coolers, instead of to rely a lot on cooling towers, evaporative cooling. That will require a lot of water to bring down the heat that's coming out from the data centers.
Okay, now let's switch gears and move just across the strait to Singapore. Singapore has high humidity. It is land poor, and it basically operates 24/7 due to being a global business hub. What kind of pressure does that place on cooling in your opinion?
It does place a huge amount of pressure on cooling, because it means that people who operate huge data centers has to consider how they can effectively cool their data centers. And with all the change in the climate, it means that you're going to put more energy into using coolant to try and cool it down, and using more water to be able to remove heat from all these data centers. So in that kind of an environment, where you rely on traditional way of cooling, it does cause a lot of impact, and it will put a lot of strain, both in terms of resources as well as people who are planning to build data centers.
Since we are talking about strain, I thought I'll bring up this incident that happened in Singapore last year, a cooling system failure. It caused a massive outage in Singapore. And I was wondering, with the increased adoption of AI applications, would you say there is a need to relook at how data centers are being cooled?
Definitely. For AI applications, it requires a lot of higher computing requirements. It's not going to be using your typical lower processing kind of a computers, right? You'll be using system that requires higher GPUs, multiple GPUs, and all this adds to the heat generated by all these servers. So therefore, in order to cool these servers down, it reached a point where air-cool has reached a certain point of limitations that makes it very difficult to effectively remove all the heat generated by all these servers. So for data centers to be able to effectively look at removing heat, definitely a new way of cooling their data centers has to be looked at. If they look at directly removing heat from all the hottest components within all these servers using liquid, which is a better media for removing heat, it will definitely help. So data centers definitely needs to relook at how they cool their IT stacks, their IT components, as all these components get more intense in terms of the heat and power generated by it.
Okay, so you have touched upon, the different ways of cooling briefly in your previous responses, but now I'd like to delve a little deeper. There's so many different types of liquid cooling options available to data centers. What factors do you think data center operators should consider while picking the option that is best for them?
Right. So obviously data centers today has created impact to many different types of stakeholders. In the past, we always think it's just the IT people that should be concerned with what goes on within the data centers. Now, if you look at data centers today, there is a huge amount of resource that data centers consume, from energy to water to land, and therefore it causes a sustainability issues. That also cause an increase in terms of financial costs in order to run data centers. And obviously, we can never forget about the IT people who has to deploy all these solutions. So an effective solutions or things that data centers or various stakeholders have to consider will be one, it has to be sustainable. The ability to reduce energy and water consumptions using less space would be important. Um, and of course, by reducing the energy and water, it also reduces costs. So it benefits the company financially. And for the IT folks, it really means that do they have a solution that is easy to deploy, scale, and maintain? Because there's always been a lot of concern that if you change a new way of doing things, is it going to be easy, right? Is it going to be it's easy for the IT people to deploy? And there's always a lot of fear in trying new things. So I would say that sustainability, scalability, ease of deploying and service would be the main criteria that people should look at when they are looking at changing how they deploy their IT equipment in their data centers.
That's an excellent checklist: sustainability, scalability, and ease of deployment. Now, that is easy to remember, but I'm a little curious, Jason. Do you think liquid cooling can completely eliminate the need for traditional air cooling?
No, I don't think that would happen, partly because there will still be a lot of IT requirements that are of low computing needs that will not be require liquid cooling at all because it doesn't make financial sense to cool those kind of equipment down. So I do think that we're going to see a hybrid type of environment where at the enterprise levels within a data centers, they will put liquid cool solutions side by side with air cool servers, or even in a larger data centers, they may build different data halls, with certain data halls being liquid cooled for the high intensive AI driven type of processing requirement, and air cooled for the more lower type of processing servers that's put inside there. And therefore, it goes back again to what I mentioned that in such scenario, especially when you're looking at a hybrid environment, is it easy and simple to deploy a liquid cool solution side by side with your air cool environment? Because that will make it easier for any IT, CTOs to consider when they want to embark on liquid cool for their high-end processing servers.
Interesting. Now let's look at the third angle to things. We have the technology, we have the intent, but I think you also need to extend a certain kind of a regulatory environment and policy support, right? What do you think you need in terms of regulatory changes and policy support to help data centers adopt more sustainable practices, including switching to liquid cooling?
Well, I think a lot of it, one is obviously education. The other thing is obviously incentive. Now, there are a lot of data centers operators out there, a lot of end customers who are still trying to figure out how to move from air cool to liquid cool, what will be the most sustainable options for them to move ahead. And I think in terms of incentive, regulatory incentive to help move and push that mandate for a lot of data centers to consider that as part of the requirement when building new data centers would definitely help. Without that, I believe there's no incentive to change.
Incentive to change. I think also a certain amount of collaboration is required, right? So, in your opinion, what can be done to foster greater collaboration between various stakeholders so that the policies and incentives can be more effective and business friendly?
Well, communication will be one of the big things. Our work group, getting feedback from the various stakeholders. When I say stakeholders, it could mean regulators from the government side, operators of large data centers, and as well as end users. This various group has to come together in order to decide that how they want to move forward and to be able to communicate, because different groups will face different challenges. It is always easy to push certain mandate out without consideration of what it may impact to other stakeholders. And very often I get feedback from end users that certain things are a bit limiting for them when they try to embark on certain type of new initiatives. So that work group level kind of communications, coming out with new standards that has contribution from all the various people, the various stakeholders, will help in putting out a more clear path for everyone to embark on and put their stake behind it and says that yes, this is something doable and we'll move forward with it.
Perfect. So we need to work together to make this happen. That's an excellent note to end this beautiful chat on. Thank you so much for talking to me today, Jason. It was a very informative chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deborah. It was a pleasure.
That will be all for today. We hope to meet you next time soon with another informative chat with an industry expert. Thanks for watching.